Our family is from a region called Galicia. There was the breadbasket of Europe because the soil was very, very black, very, very rich. And there were many Jewish communities in the western Ukraine and eastern Poland. Every small town and the bigger cities. But there were hundreds of little skalots. My town, where I lived, Skalat, was towards the east. In town there was a square with 4 towers. They go back to the end of the 1600s, 17th century they were built. And there was a moat. Beyond that, there was the Catholic Church. And there was a beautiful square. There was a lot of greenery there, there was grass, and we had tennis courts. The entire town is made up of 8,600 people. 3,500 are Jewish.
So you grew up in a community where it wasn't 0.2 or even 2 or even 20%, it was 30 or 40% Jewish.
Exactly. And everybody spoke Yiddish. People lived, people educated children. They conducted commerce. They were involved in different organizations, religious, Zionist, political. Newspapers were printed. There were schools, there were physicians.
So ethnic Polish doctors as well as ethnic Jewish doctors practiced side by side?
Private practice.
But in the same hospital?
Yes. It was not Fiddler on the Roof. On Shabbat, if you stuck your head out through some of the windows in our room, we had a few, and you saw the windows of my neighbors flickering candles as far as your eye could see into your neighbors. When I was a little girl, I was surrounded by my family. My grandmother lived with us. My grandfather was a religious man.
But in the United States...
He was a Hasid. I can only remember being rather a little bit apprehensive and frightened of him. My father had so many siblings. There were 9 children altogether. My father, he was the tallest, one of the tallest siblings. My mother was short. My cousins with whom I played all the time, back and forth. My home was their home, and my aunt's home was my home. All these houses were my homes. There was a little canal which led from the Center Marketplace pump all the way down when the water was running, but it was narrow. You were able to jump over it by foot. Across this little canal, my grandfather lived with his second oldest daughter.
So your father, how did he end up in Skalat meeting your mother?
Across that canal, 3 doors down, lived Frida Rubin. And that was my grandmother's house. You want to know how they met? My father must have jumped over the little rivulet. You wanted to know the story, right?
He saw a pretty girl on the other side.
And he saw a woman, a beautiful woman on the other side. There was not far from us, not far from the little canal going down, a very beautiful bakery, a clean one as far as my mother was concerned. I have never tasted anything as delicious as those matzahs. My mother, I think I take it from her. She absolutely was a housekeeper who loved to have a lovely home. We had a living room. It was very, very beautifully furnished. She loved to display her porcelain.
Now I understand. There isn't a corner, there isn't a spot in your homes, Mom, that isn't meticulously taken care of.
And me, and it's
and
me.
I can understand now where
You
it
know
came
me.
from.
My mother was that kind, incredible, and that room was beautiful. I'll give you an example, David. The floors were polished, not like it is here, a brown with a polyurethane on top. They were polished with a red paste. And there was a maid.
So you had a maid?
Oh yes, we
Oh.
had a maid. Absolutely.
Lived in or came during?
Lived in.
Okay.
Lived in. So she had brushes, and I was hysterically happy when she did it, because what did she do? She danced. She danced. She danced and danced and danced. What was she doing? She was polishing the darn floor. When you
Is
walked
that how you
over it.
learned how to dance?
Exactly. But there was on top of it a beautiful Persian rug. In the corner was a chaise lounge covered with red velvet. I remember my mother's cooking as being the best in the world. And the cooking consisted primarily of soup every day. Borscht, kapusta, cabbage soup, and potato soup. I remember the first vegetables that come in from the garden, peas and cucumbers and radishes and scallions, which my mother used to mix it with cottage cheese and with cream. Oh, it was a treat. Every spring before Passover, that house was turned upside down. There was not a piece of furniture like here and there that was not taken out, and every corner was cleaned. And then when fresh linens were put on and the room was turned, fresh curtains, and from the attic, a set of dishes was brought in. And I was waiting for one little plate, which was given to me every single Passover. It was a white porcelain plate, and inside was painted a red rooster. I was going already at that point to a religious, you want to call it Jewish or yeshiva school. We were being taught songs to sing, specific songs on Purim, on Hanukkah, and we were taught how to recite little poems, either in Hebrew, in Yiddish,
So
or
you
in
were learning
Polish. Songs, through songs and through stories. I have to learn a poem, so I learned the Yiddish and I learned the Polish. For the holiday, parents were invited, and we were performing. There was music, somebody was playing an instrument, and we had even a piano in that school. And I was reciting a very long, difficult poem, too. And when it was finished, there was absolutely a great deal of applause. We walk out, blah, 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 congratulating. They were patting me, you did nicely. Oh, such a smart little girl. Okay, my father doesn't say anything. Gives me a hug and a kiss, puts me on his shoulders, and carries me throughout the entire road, which was through the town, all the way home. That pride in my father stayed with me for the rest of my days. One afternoon, relatives came from America to visit us in Scarlet. And they brought us goodies, chocolate, some clothes. And one of the things which they brought me was a huge doll. Big, beautiful blonde doll with blue eyes that opened and closed, opened and closed. My cousins were fascinated by it. Everybody was trying to pull her eyes out to see how she is opening the eyes. My mother said, "Hold the doll, children. You for a few minutes, you for a few minutes." They never held a doll like that. She wanted to give them the thrill, let them have the pleasure of holding this unusual thing. Look at the generosity of my mother. I loved making jams and preserves with my mother. We would pick all kinds of things, cherries, raspberries, rose petals, and preserve them and make sauces out of it and preserves.
Pickles? Did you have pickles?
It's the only way in the wintertime you had it, sour pickles.
And did your mother and did your father?
Absolutely,
So you prepared
barrels full.
pickles. This is
Yeah,
what we're looking
how
for.
else, David?
Half sour and sour pickles from the local deli. Did you have half sour and sour
I
pickles
know
from the
that they
local
were
deli as
delicious
well?
because the dill And the fresh ingredients were truly, truly wonderful. A whole barrel, which went to December. How cold the winters were and how long that season was. But we had feather blankets made out of down. Boy, were they warm. Unbelievable. And if we have to get up, you have to go to school. I don't want to, because I didn't want to go out. So we tried to get dressed under the covers. Very often, something already was baked, whether it was a roll, which was cut in half and spread with a little butter. And through the marketplace, through the main street, all the way into the other streets, people dug a path so that the children would start walking where? To school. And in between the snow fights and the balls flying and trying to hide from one and then throwing back were delicious. In school, we learned math, we learned Polish, the official language, we learned geography. I knew that the Nile is in Egypt. I knew that Cairo was the capital. We knew that Mississippi was the big river in America. Once a week, when it was market day, which was Tuesday, peasants and people from the surrounding towns would come to buy and to sell. After they sold their calves, their chickens, their geese, their eggs, they earned the money, they would immediately hit the stores to buy the things which they needed for the farms. My grandfather and then my father had a big hardware store for farm implements and additional goods, paint and nails and hammers and sickles and even a plow. My uncle Zalman Leib had a very big shoe store. And my uncle Moishe Bernstein had a big grocery store. Our store was right facing the market, which was one of the best locations. Our house was in the back of the store. My father, he was a terrific businessman. And listen to me, he was earning enough money, David. I had a dowry prepared, and before he died, he took the money, he gave it to his older brother, to Tinka's father, and he says, I want you to buy so many acres of land for my child, a dowry. And all of a sudden, I hear my mother saying, not to me, but to the neighbors, he's not feeling well. And in those days, my father's taken to Vienna, and he's being operated on. After he returned, my beloved father succumbs to cancer. And my mother was widowed for 2 years before she married my stepfather. It was an arranged marriage. And my little sister, Gina, is born. There was a certain rhythm to life, which was dictated both by the season and by the religious rituals. Shabbat was absolutely scrupulously observed. Nobody paid, nobody conducted business, nobody traveled. This started Friday night. My mother would get up maybe 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, especially when the days were short in the wintertime, in order to start cooking chali, gefilte fish, and chicken for Shabbat.
So this was Friday morning, so that by the time the sun set, she was no longer doing work.
Absolutely. And my grandmother would cook a big pot of chicken soup and knedlach. And she says, go to this and this family and bring this soup to them. And in the kitchen, on the table, the white tablecloth and the 2 candlesticks were waiting. We were scrubbed as little children. That I remember. Because remember, there was no running water. So big pots of water this was after the Shabbos meal was cooked. And when my mother stood in front of those candles with a scarf on her head And she enclosed the candles 3 times with her hands and put her hands against her face and started to bless the candles. We who stood there, this was a holy moment. I have lit the candles all the days of my life, and every time I light the candles on Friday, my mother is in front of me. Saturday evening, they were bringing in the cinema maybe once a week, and we were treated to special films like Shirley Temple.
Smile and be happy, your trouble can't be as bad as all that. When you're sad as all that, no one loves you. Be optimistic, don't you be a mourner. Brighten up that corner and smile. Be optimistic, and smile.
I remember when the anti-Semites were beginning to organize, they were boycotting the Jewish stores. And this was almost like taking away your living. They believed we were the people who cannot be trusted, the Judas. We were the Christ killers, the people who only want money. We were the people who are strictly interested in extracting out of you every advantage. And the children believed it. Where did they know it from? From their homes, from the society, from the expressions which were floating around for a long time. They were standing in front of my father's store and said, "Svoj do svego, Žid do Palestine." We should go to our own. Don't you dare walk into this store. And screamed, "Žid do Palestine." Jew, march out, go to Palestine. The vicious anti-Semitism was so severe. I was listening, taking in the words. You understand when somebody is screaming and telling you, "You goddamn dirty Jew, you get out of my country." A child of 7, 8 fears. In 1939, a pact took place between the Russians and the Germans. The pact was that Poland should be divided into 2 spheres of influence. A few weeks after, the Russian army came into our part where I lived. We saw them come into our towns with what kind of boots they were wearing. When they were seeing watches, can you imagine? Okay, a man's watch. They were so enchanted with the ability to buy goods which were not available to them in their own countries, that they would buy one watch and then another one and another one. And sometimes the officers are wearing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 watches. Late 1940, I remember a woman came with a child to our hometown. She was a refugee, we would call her today. Uciekać means to run, and she was one of the runners, and she's totally exhausted. Her child is hungry and parched, and her shoes are torn. And my mother and a few of her neighbors invite her to come inside. And the first thing they do is they feed her, and they feed the child. They say, "Would you like to wash your hands?" She says, "Yes." She says, "May I wash up?" And they see that she's full of lice. The woman is infested. They say, "Just throw this out." "No, it's my shirt." That's the only thing she had on her. She says, "Take it out. We will give you a shirt. We will give you a blouse." This one said, "I'm going to bring her a sweater." And they give her a few Polish zlotys. And then the woman, in a warning manner, turns to my mother and the women, the neighbors who got together, says, "You are giving me all that. You feel very sorry for me." She says, "I know it. I know what I look like." She says, "I come like you from a home. We were very comfortable. My husband was killed. I come in here," and it says, "I'm on my way." "Where are you going?" "I am on my way as far away as my feet will carry me, away from the Germans, because I saw and I know what they are doing. And she turns to all these women and she says, "Why are you sitting here? What are you waiting for? Don't you understand what I'm telling you? Why don't you run?" And the people say, "What do you mean run? Leave everything? My neighbors, my house and everything and run? And where should we run?" Again, a very wise answer. Wherever your eyes will carry you and your feet will take you. She picks herself up and she leaves. And guess what the women did in that kitchen of my mother's? I was listening, taking in the words, and the women say, "Please, you heard what she said. It's obvious the woman is unhinged. She's crazy. She doesn't know what she's saying. But you have to understand. Look at her." Only one woman says, "Maybe she is not so crazy." On July the 4th, 1941, the Germans enter our town, the patrol, and then the regular troops. When they entered the town, the population were lining the streets. The Ukrainians, they were there with their national costumes, with braids and bands and ribbons running down from their hair and their national colors, with the flags. And here and there were already the German flags, red with a Hakenkreuz. Right away, a meeting is held by the Ukrainian intelligentsia where a proposal is made to petition the Germans. One was a judge, the other one was a canon of the church, another a teacher and a blacksmith. They were known, they were friends of the Jews. Canon Onoferko used to come to my father's store because he was buying items that he needed for his church. And he spoke Yiddish better than you. And he goes to the Germans asking for 24 hours of a pogrom. How could it be believable? People who were coming to my father's store, neighbors, people who were sitting in class, their children would meet together, like that. But just like that, they could turn so against us. And when they are petitioned for a 24-hour pogrom, the German tells them, "Yes, we agree, but not the 24 hours, only 8 hours." The Ukrainians, like wild beasts, they grabbed innocent people, beat them up in the face. They molested women. With the Germans looking on, taking films, they pulled them out into the square to beat them. And they deliver blows over their head. They broke legs. People are collapsing. What does my father do? He boarded up the window and the door. And my father was saying to my mother, "Hell is going on over there. Look, I can see through the market." He cannot believe his sight. Merciless. Hundreds of innocent Jews were caught, and they are all brought in to the square between the 4 towers. There, the Germans made them go all the way to the top of the towers. And they made them jump down while the Germans on the ground were shooting them down. The next day, the Jews were forced to bring the bodies to the cemetery to bury them, to cover them up. And this was the first day of the German occupation. After only 4 weeks, 1 month, an order arrived from the Germans to establish a Judenrat. They made a Jewish police. Very shortly after the Judenrat is formed, an order comes down to wear a white armband on the right hand, and in the center, a Star of David had to be affixed. In its early days, the main function of the Judenrat was to provide workers to the Germans and the Ukrainian authorities. Every day, 200 men, 300 men went to forced labor camps, to Novoshilka, where the stone quarries were. And their job was to break boulders and then to chop up the boulders into gravel, because the Germans had to fill the roads for the tanks and trucks and supply lines. That's where my stepfather is. One day, the Germans ordered all the Jews from the surrounding towns and villages to come into Skalitz. All the Jews have to move into a ghetto. The population doubled from 4,600 to 8,500 people. And you couldn't walk out of the border. You walked out of there and the Ukrainian caught you, especially a German, he shot you on the spot. For every Jew who was caught by the Ukrainians and the Poles, they got a liter of liquor or a kilo of sugar, and they got 300 zloty. People, they were literally in the streets. Families, they slept in the marketplace. There were no sanitary facilities, no bathroom, only water that you could carry. How quickly the health conditions broke down, how quickly the diseases started to spread, primarily because of lice. It was awful. It was typhus and diphtheria. Money was worthless, and the only form of so-called trade, of buying the basic provisions, was barter. You said you want to get 2 pounds of potatoes from me and 4 kilograms of flour. I want you to give me a sweater and 2 shirts for my husband. I don't have 2 shirts. Well, then I'll give you only 1 kilo of potatoes. If you had a very fine fur coat, you didn't dare to put it on, because the Judenrat would come and say, we need for tomorrow 7 ladies' fur coats and 4 men's fur coats, or else. We were awakened. We hear the motorized soldiers coming in. Panic had stricken us. Germans, with the help of the Ukrainians, saying, this is a Jewish home, this is not. This and this is a Jewish home. They go from house to house, bang on the doors. We are running upstairs to the attic. And we sit down and we are quiet. We were petrified. We hear a movement, the Germans, and the main part of the attic. And my mother says, don't you move. And if you have to urinate, If you have to pee, just where you're standing or where you're lying down. And we didn't dare to move. And they were on the other side of a partition, standing still and listening whether there is a mouse or a cat or a Jew to be found. They'd knock on that wall. They would hear a hollow spot. And they broke through the wall, and within a minute, we formed a ladder of human beings. We jump one on top of the other. We pry open the door, and we run outside. My mother held on to me, but we run. And a neighbor's little girl attaches herself to us. There was an alley, and my mother screams to us, "Run, children, run!" Because the Germans were running in and out, crawling, going, looking, seeking. And we run into that house, and we see bedlam, as if a tornado hit it. And there was a pantry. And we made our way inside. And my mother said the following, "You go in, children, and I will cover you with my body." And she threw herself at us, tried to bring down on herself a piece of furniture or a chair or a rag, thinking that if they come and stand at the door and begin to shoot, it's her body who will be sheltering me, her daughter, and the young girl from being killed. And we were sitting there listening the whole night and the following day. Over 3,100 Jews in a period of 2 days were caught. And then they were taken together by truck and by train to Belzec. And at Belzec, they were exterminated by gas. The people in town were dazed. We couldn't believe it. And the rabbi orders 7 days of mourning, that we do not do anything except wear ashes. When it's such a catastrophe, you covered ashes on the head, and people sat and did nothing but mourned. We are driven out of our house, forced to live with other families in a house outside of our town. There are only about 700 people left. Everyone was exhausted and on edge from tension and lack of sleep. And one night, I thought that I heard somebody run very fast through the alley. Run! I woke up my mother. Ma, somebody ran through the alley. Shh. Mommy, there was somebody. There was something going on. Everybody was on their feet like that, because we slept in our clothes. We slept in our shoes to be ready to get up. So we got up. What happened? Where did we go? When we moved into that apartment, we decided to do what everybody else did. That's what it was called, the underground city. We decided to build a bunker. We will imitate the walls of the cellar, and we will build up a false wall with mortar and old stones to make that wall not sound hollow. They cut out a square, and they made a tunnel, and then started to dig further down. Now, there was a narrow pipe which was sticking out to supply air. It was done very, very quietly and surreptitiously. At night, it took a few weeks, and then a bunker was built. Because there was no place we had to run outside. There was no place to beg the Germans. There was no place to bribe. What we have to do, we have to hide. Actions were following one on top of the other. Just before dawn, I heard 3 shots. 1, 2, 3. Germans were attacking. People were desperate. We began to descend into our bunker. There was only one problem. There was no room literally even where to stand. But we did. We pulled down the cover of our bunker over our heads, hoping that this would be enough to camouflage. Within 10 minutes, the Germans come down the steps. They look around with their flashlights. They knock on the walls, thinking they will hear an echo. We were as quiet as a mouse. We sit there, I don't know how long. You lose track of time. And all of a sudden, we were beginning to choke. There was no longer any oxygen. And then the trouble started. People started to panic. When you're gasping for air and you cannot breathe, the first thing that you do is you want to go up outside of the water. You want to go outside there. And some people immediately ran up and forced the bunker open. When the door opened up, there was a relief. And the German patrol, he saw them and he whistled and shouted, "Juden raus, Juden raus." They started to round up the Jews coming out from the bunker. My mother said, "No way am I going to go out." She held me and my sister by our hands and said, "Absolutely not. I'm not going to go out." All right? And we didn't. The Germans started to shoot down into the bunker. And I begin to cry. And she holds me in her arms. That's all she can do, the only protection she could give me. It was a miracle. We survived. The remaining Jews now were confined to a few narrow back streets in our town. This time, the Rosenblatts took us in. Inside the house, people moved about mechanically. No one spoke very much. Even the complaints, which at times would arise from living together in tight quarters, had stopped. Each family was confined itself to one bed. Whatever our possessions were was on the bed. Whatever we were able to do, we slept 3 or 4 people in one bed. We ate on the bed. We planned escapes on the bed. We fantasized that the Germans are being defeated in probably any day. They don't even know about it. The Russians are going to walk in and they will save us on the bed. I used to pinch myself in order not to sleep, try to keep myself awake desperately, to be on my guard. My mother spent the night awake, sitting on the edge of a narrow bed, which she shared with me and my 5-year-old sister. I would say to my mother, "Mom, can I go to sleep now?" She says, "Go ahead, I am awake." I remember my mother's instructions to me, because she was positive that I will only survive. She begged me and indoctrinated me what I can do, the name to choose. Don't make a mistake by saying anything in Yiddish. Don't even dream about it. My mother gets up in the morning and she doesn't say a word to us, takes me in one hand and takes my little sister in the other hand, and she said, "Let's go." I wrote about it in detail. I remember that day because I've lived that day through all the days of my life. All the days of my life. In my dreams, they come these days. In my nightmares, they come these days to me. I have lived them since that day. It was the end of the 2nd year of the German occupation. We were walking through back streets and alleys, staying close to the doorways. As we passed the prayer house where our family worshipped, my mother explained that we were going to a Gentile family to whom she had given all our remaining possessions and who in turn had promised to hide us when the time came. The family lived in a formerly Jewish-owned house and very near our own house. I knew every corner of that house where I used to play with my cousins and friends. We were approaching the house. Suddenly, we heard the terrifying sounds of shooting coming from the ghetto, and action had started. It was fast, loud, and full of painful screams and death. People everywhere were running, and we too started to run as fast as we could. We reached the house where we would be saved. We pushed our way inside. We found ourselves standing in front of a man, his wife, and 2 small children. The man stared at us in disbelief and told his wife to take the children to the back of the room. He then turned to my mother and in a loud and angry voice shouted, "What are you doing here? You must get out of here immediately." "But we can't leave. An action has started, and you promised to hide us." My mother said, "I have no hiding place. I want you out of here right now." He started to push us out of the room as my mother continued to plead. "Have mercy on my children. The streets are full of Germans," she sobbed, "and if we go out, we will be killed." The man's wife returned and, confronting her husband, demanded that he throw us out immediately. In the ensuing commotion, my mother turned her head quickly and looked at me. On her face, I caught a glimpse of unspeakable desperation. She was afraid to speak, but her gaze was totally fixed on me. With all the strength left in her, she wanted to say something, but her lips remained closed. Suddenly, she opened her eyes wide and shot me a glance wild with urgency. Then, with an instant wink, she willed me to move. She was telling me to get away now, to run, to save myself. As I stepped back, my mother turned from me, and I never saw her face again. I moved back into a small vestibule. I opened the one door leading to a pantry. In the corner of the ceiling was an opening leading to the attic. Digging my nails into the wooden door with all my strength, I grabbed a hinge and hoisted myself up. The attic was covered with straw and dust. My legs became shaky, and I sank to the floor. I noticed a small space between 2 beams. Feet first, I slid on my stomach into the narrow space. I finally was hidden. Within 10 or 15 minutes, I heard the front door burst open. Germans, accompanied by a barking dog, were shouting, "Juden raus!" Jews, get out. Now they were coming up to the attic. I could see the bottom of a German soldier's boots and the legs of a dog. I started to shake uncontrollably and had to push my tongue between my lips and teeth to stop my chattering. I held my breath as he passed only inches from my face. In minutes, the search was over and the German left. I cried silently and I fell asleep. Only to awaken frightened, I was aware that I was wet and angry for allowing myself to slip away from vigilance. I heard the man. He was walking around and calling. I had no choice. Weak and stiff, I crawled out of the hole. I had wet the ceilings, he said. He demanded that I leave his house immediately. I asked, and where are my mother and sister? He told me that there were no more Jews left in Skalat, and that my mother and sister had been killed. I begged him to let me stay until evening, because if I were to go out in the daytime, I said I would be recognized. They might question me where I had hidden. He says, but I didn't hide you. But that's what they will think. I blackmailed him. He agreed reluctantly. That evening, as I walked out into the unsafe streets of my native town, I was 12 years old and all alone on the streets of Skalat. And I was able to hide and walk in the shadow, walking with my back against the buildings. I tried to make myself as flat as I could, because when the moon came out from under the clouds, it lit up everything, and everything was me. How my heart was pounding, and this is the manner in which I walked 2 or 3 steps and stopped, 4 or 5 steps and stopped, another 2 steps and stopped. And I come to the Polish church, and I feel relieved because there were longer shadows. I suddenly hear somebody walking. I thought death was coming in, and he was behind me, came from another street. And lo and behold, I recognize him. And I say, Mr. Sass, please take me with you. He had an armband which gave him permission from the German authorities at the work camp. He says, but I'm going to walk ahead of you, and you walk behind me. Follow me. He says, be quiet, not a word out of you. And we walk. And I walk and I come closer to the camp. At the gate, there were guards. And I back off and I go around the corner, and Mr. Sass is let in. And I go to the side of the camp, and I see that the fence is maybe a few inches above the ground. And I bend down, and with my nails, with my fingers, just like a dog, I guess I was imitating a dog. Maybe that's what I saw. I go, dig, 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 dig. I stop. I dig, 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 dig. I stop. I dig, 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 dig. On the side, dig, dig, dig. And I slowly crawl. I tried to even out the hole, whatever I could. There should not be a sign. And I'm inside the camp. And in the corner is a whole big hill, a big mountain of things that were all brought in from the ghetto after each action. And everything was there. And I crawl and I get in and in and in, and I am in camp now and hidden. In camp and hidden. And then I hear something. I take a look. There was a Jew. I was not the only one hiding there. Unbelievable. Wet, tired, hungry people who were hiding. I was one of them. Then there were 2 or 3 other children. Not only did we know each other, but there was a certain solidarity. And those who knew my stepfather, Jacob, was in the camp, communicate that I am here. That night, my stepfather finds me. He brings me into the building up to his area, which is he was on the top level of a bunk. He told me the next day he's going to the quarry and he's going to cover me up, that when the inspection comes to make sure that everybody got up from the bunks, nobody will recognize me. I'm not to move a whole day until he comes back. All right. Okay, I was safe. That night, when he comes back, he says, listen, you cannot stay in here, because if you do, sooner or later, they're going to discover you. So what am I to do? He says, I don't know, but I know you have to get out of here. And the same advice as my mother gave me in camp, which was bitter and difficult to carry out, the same advice was given. Geh wie die Augen im dich trugen. Go wherever your eyes will lead you and your feet will carry you. At night when it's dark, we say our goodbyes and I crawl out of camp. I tied a scarf under my chin. I removed my fancy sweater, turned it inside out. I didn't want to look like a Jewess. And I tried to take off my shoes in order to walk barefooted, to look much more like a peasant child. And I walk and I walk. When I saw a peasant, I remembered the greeting they would say to each other. Let Jesus Christ be blessed forever and ever. And when somebody would say this to me, I would answer, Na wieki wieków, amen. Forever and ever, amen. For 2 or 3 days, I was walking. I slept in fields. I walked long enough for me to leave one village and to be very close to the next one. And the next village was Novoshulka. And I walk from the fields and I hear that I'm close to the quarries. There were noises, there were trucks, there was banging. I'm approaching the quarries. And a man spots me from far away and he recognizes me. He notifies my stepfather that your stepdaughter is walking towards here. The Germans are all around, and the Ukrainians. My stepfather gets up on the highest part of the quarry and knocks and knocks and works and begins to sing loudly a Yiddish song. I hear that as I am approaching, and in the song it tells me, do not approach any closer because you'll be killed. He says, everything is lost here. We have no hope of surviving. And you turn around now immediately. Run from here wherever you can. Save yourself, child. Because here there is no way out. I turn around and I bolt back at a run away from there. It's the last contact with the Jewish community. Anybody that I can stretch my hands out to help me. I am really and truly, totally on my own. And I begin to go back, away from the quarries. So it wasn't so simple that I was walking out. It was a lifetime of walking, a lifetime. Between villages, Stara Skala, Novoshulka, and Polupanovka was the furthest point that I knew how to walk. One night, I go into the barn. There were mice jumping all around, and I was afraid to fall asleep, that the mouse will come up and bite me. Early in the morning, a woman comes into the barn to milk the cow. And inadvertently, I make a noise, and I scare the hell out of her. Because the first thing she says in Ukrainian is, "Хто там?" Who is there? And I admit who I am. I blurted out in Ukrainian, "This is me." And she says right away, "То жидівка. This is a Jewess who is here." I said, "Yes." She turns around, she says, "My God, do you know into whose house you fell in?" Outside in the house is my brother-in-law. He is the head of the Ukrainian police. "If he finds you here," she said, "you're dead." He says, "Now you have to get out." He says, "Here, drink some milk. You listen to me. When you come out of the barn, you will be on our garden. Turn left, start walking on that road ahead of you." The peasants from the villages were in the fields. I approached one person. I said, "I'm an orphan. Do you have any work?" He says, "No, I'm sorry, but I have no work for you." Young, skinny kid, what could I do? There were about 3 or 4 people I approached. Each and every one of them refuses. And then another woman walks across, and I approach her, and I say in Ukrainian, "Chochu, chochu, auntie, auntie, I need work." She gives me the instrument, the tool with which she's working around the potato, and she says, "Take it and start cleaning the weeds around it." I take it and I start doing, I have no idea, but I'm watching her from the side of my eyes how to do it. Like so, boom! I hit my toe and I begin to bleed, and profusely. She said to me, "You good for nothing." She says, "You good for nothing. I thought you know." I said, "Well, this particular tool is not familiar to me. I live in the town. My mother wouldn't give me a chance to work with this." She says, "Take some soil in your hand and spit on it. Spit on it. Spit again." And I start to spit, and then she says, "Make like a piece of bread." I begin to knead it. And it's wet. She says, "Now take it and put it on your toe." And I did. And I get no infection. I stayed with her for the remainder of the day. She said, "Do you know how to take care of children?" I said, "Yes, we have a lot of children in my family. We have 7 children." I made up the story. She says, "Good, I have 2 small little boys. Will you be able to take care of them?" I said, "Yes." The woman was widowed the year before, and she was living with her mother-in-law, who was a mean, nasty person, and the mother-in-law has a son and a daughter. Both of them were mentally, the son especially, was definitely mentally challenged. And we all lived and slept in one room, and we ate our meals low on a table. And in the morning she would cook milk, kasha. And when she cooked that, she would give me a little bit in a plate for one child and in another. And they had a disgusting way of how to make sure that the little boy is not going to get burnt. Do you know what they did? They took a spoon and they put it in the porridge, and then the woman took it in her mouth. And when she was convinced that it's not too hot, she would put it back on the spoon and into the child's mouth. She taught me how to do it. And then it was so delicious that a little bit of that porridge stayed in my mouth, and I swallowed it. So later on, she wouldn't permit me to feed the children. And for dinner, the soup was placed in the middle, and we all ate from this common bowl. And I didn't know how to do it. She said, "What is the matter with you? You're eating like a Jew." That sobered me up in 2 seconds. You're not polite over food. Over food is there, you eat. You bend over the plate and you eat, and you eat, and you eat. You don't take a spoon and you put it in your mouth and then you bend back. You're eating like a Jewess. Stop that. And I stopped very quickly. I learned What I didn't know, I mimicked. What I didn't know, I kept quiet. And the most dangerous period were the first 2 or 3 weeks until a strange face comes into a village and without speaking is accepted by the villagers without them coming around. Who are you? Where do you come from? Who is she? I become part of the scenery. I had to be in the barns all the time with the cows and the horses and the pigs and the chickens and so on. It was difficult, back-breaking work. I had to clean the horses and cows. I had to tie the front legs of the horse. I went to the horse from the back. And when I came close to him, he kicked me so hard in my chest that I keeled over. And I fell, and immediately a second kick came, but I was already on the ground. He could have killed me. And that village idiot, so to speak, sees the scene, and he walks over to me and says, "What did you do? You approached him from the back? Don't you know better?" I was a little bit puzzled, but more than puzzled, I was afraid. What? What better? You never approach a horse from the back. And when he told me that, he says, "Come on, let me show you." He was kind to me. I couldn't expect it. He says, "You go to him always from the front, so he can see you." When I used to go out with the cows and the horses to pasture, I made sure that we were as far away from the other children who were taking out the animals to pasture. Why? Why? I was afraid that somehow they will be able to read on my forehead, "What? Jude." It was dangerous, very, very dangerous. I always remembered my mother's instructions to me. Don't make a mistake by saying anything in Yiddish. Don't even dream about it. Don't dream that you have me as a mother Jewish. You are not a Jew. And that was me. And one night, I must have had a nightmare, and I must have screamed out one word in Yiddish. It may have been nothing more than, "Oy vey! Oy vey!" And she said in the morning, "What were you saying? What were you talking about at night?" And she tried to imitate, "Koi, koi, oi, koi, koi." Oy vey. I was totally unaware of it. It was a bitter cold winter. From day to day, night to night, minute to minute, somehow, like a little rabbit in the field, to be lucky enough to move one way rather than the other. One day in March, I hear the cannonades, and I can hear the tanks coming in. Soldiers were coming and going. We heard the shooting coming on. And the soldiers came, the German soldiers left, and the Russian soldiers came in. And everybody knew that the war is coming to an end. And I was finally liberated. I didn't want to say hello, goodbye, thank you, nothing. I left. I took off. I was going home. Home. H-O-M-E. Home. I want to go to see my mother. I wanted my mother. Where does a child go? I was hoping for anything. I start early in the morning, walked practically 3/4 of a day. I was walking and walking. But when I came to my hometown, what I found were rubbles. The whole section was totally leveled, and there was stone on top of stone. I don't know what to do, but I know how to cry, and I know how to lie down. And I see a woman is walking, and she's coming closer and closer to me, and she looks at me. And the sight which I must have had, filthy, torn, barefooted, sick. And she stops in front of me in shock. She said, "You survived? All alone?" And I immediately answer her in Ukrainian. Бігмея жидівка, но я забула говорити по-жидівськи. I swear to you, I'm Jewish, but I forgot how to speak Yiddish. I could not bring out one word in Yiddish. And she turns around to me as if I was crazy. She says, "What are you talking about? Of course you are Jewish. I know who you are. I know your parents. We were neighbors. Come with me." And then the tears really started to flow. And what happened? She starts to cry. And she doesn't touch me because I'm full of sores. I'm sick. And we walk and we cry, and we cry and we walk. And we walk across the square of the marketplace. Behind there, she is living with 2 other families. And I take a bath, and the lice and whatever was on me is being washed off. And these sympathetic surrogate mothers, they give me some kind of a shirt or a blouse, and she makes a little spot and a little bed, and I fall into a deep sleep. In the morning, Dr. Gutman takes one look at me. I don't know how to express it. He breaks down. He knew my mother. He was our doctor. He says, "Let me see your hands." They were covered with sores. He gave me a salve. He says, "In 3 days she will be fine." And I'm finally cured of this thing. I stayed maybe a few weeks, and then I learned that my cousin Tinka Rosenzweig is alive. She's in the next town. My cousin comes and she says, "Come with me." She worked as a secretary for the military. 2 rooms were assigned to us by the Russian government. We were 5 people in 1 room and a small little kitchen. And that period was almost a year until the war ends officially in May 45. And then with my cousin, we go to Poland. From there, it's a different story. I landed in Lodz with my cousin. In Lodz, I couldn't stay very long. My cousin was running short of provisions. She had nothing what to eat, and she couldn't take care of me. And one day, when my cousin said, "You know, maybe it would be a good idea for you to go to an orphanage." And then I remembered my friend Lunia went to an orphanage in Bielsko. She gave me the name of the town before she left. So I said, yes, that's what I'm going to do. My cousin buys me 1 ticket one way, and at the station, she's crying. We said our goodbyes, and I get on the train. I come to the station in Bielsko, and I come down, and I have no idea where to go. Does it sound familiar? Does it sound familiar? I begin to ask, where is this address? Do you know an orphanage? I walk. And I walk and I walk and I walk, and sure enough, there is the number I want. I knock on the door. No answer. I knock on the door again. I stand there and I knock on the door. The door opens up and a woman comes out, says, "Who are you? We don't accept any more children. We are full up to here. We don't have enough food for the children that we have here. But I haven't got where to go." She says, "Where is your mother?" I said, "I don't have a mother. I don't have a father." She says, "Come in." And then I see my friend Lunia. She says, "Thank God that you're here already. Now we are safe." We fell on each other's shoulders and we cried. There were two women who were running the orphanage. They were a mother and a daughter who really wanted generously to change the world. The older girls, we have to help care for the little ones. And then one night, something is very wrong. The people in the kitchen, the supervisor, something is very wrong. A panic set in. The Polish fascists, they threw in 2 hand grenades into the other orphanage. Sooner or later, this orphanage will be just as attacked. And I think it was either the next day or the day after, the Zionist people, they came up with 2 trucks and they said to us, "Right now we take you with us because your lives here are in danger and on the line." And we went right, we filled those trucks. And the trucks take off. We traveled overnight, and they explained to us that we were going to have to cross the borders illegally. "We do not want for you to speak one word of Yiddish anymore, nor do we want you to speak a word of Polish anymore." There was a reason for that. "You are going to be going from Poland as a group of Greek people. So your native country is going to be Greece. Our group was supposed to speak a language which the Poles will not recognize. And that language was picked obviously as what? Hebrew. There was a problem though. You know what the problem was, don't you? We had no idea how to speak Hebrew. So what was the problem to do? We were to recite a prayer. And the prayer was in such a way, Baruch Atah, and somebody answered, Adonai Eloheinu. And this conversation through a prayer had to be going on in order to throw the Polish inspectors and guards that we were Greeks. We were literally speaking something which was Greek to them. It was also Greek to us. We traveled together at least 2 or 3 weeks by truck, by train, and we walked. Our leaders, they were Zionist people of the survivors. And they were in touch already with active people, you know, from where? From Palestine. They organized, with the help of the Jewish community in other cities, it was like a underground railroad. We stayed in different places like hostels or whatever it was prepared for us. I'll tell you, David, I know where I am in the wintertime. On December 25th, I am probably in Czechoslovakia and Carlsbad, because they tell me, get up, birthday girl. I was 15 years old. From Czechoslovakia, we go to the American zone of Germany. There were American soldiers. The German government, which was defeated, had been ordered to prepare housing for people like myself and others coming out from all kinds of areas. And most important, from where? From concentration camps. There was a sense where nobody will have the right to throw us out of there. Fernwald was the name of our displaced persons camp, the one where we were assigned to. We were about 25 teenagers. We were assigned different rooms, 2 or 3 rooms for the girls, 2 or 3 rooms for the boys. There was a common place down in the basement where cooking was done. The Jewish Joint Distribution and the UNRWA, they were instrumental in supplying some of the food. Clothes and shoes and blankets and the pillows. And then later on delivered long benches and long tables. That became our dining room, the place where we would sit down and have discussions and lessons. And once a week there was a lesson to learn the history of Judaism, how to read the Hebrew text, which included writing and grammar. And then later on, the history of Zionism. He introduced the history of the world, beginning with ancient history. We were penniless. We had to wait for help only from outside sources. But nevertheless, they come. And my shoes are falling apart. And sure enough, a pair of shoes come from UNRWA. And I put them on and they fit. And they fit. And I was so afraid to walk in those shoes because I figured if I wear them out, I will not get another pair so soon. So I preferred to wear the broken up shoes. And they will assign work to us. They will assign responsibilities. We had to clean. We had to cook. We had to wash. At one point I was in the laundry. I was doing laundry. And we washed, and by hand, and by hand. It's a lot to do laundry for 25 people.
You married a man that was in the laundry.
The laundry business. Everything was organized. There were lists of people, number one, who survived, and people who were looking for survivors. There were lists posted and pasted to the doors and the walls. My name is so-and-so and so. My mother's name was so-and-so. I am alive. My mother's name, my father's name, I come from this and this town. Does anybody know them? Did anybody meet these people? Does anybody know anything about it? And over and over and over, everybody was daily looking. They came from Landsberg to Fernwald, from Fernwald to a third camp, from that camp to a fourth. The communication was constant, back and forth. We used to celebrate Jewish holidays together. All the time we had exchanged ideas, and we were protesting against the British mandate. We were parading with flags. All of a sudden, blue and white became the common flag for us. We put one foot in front of the other just because life demands it. Live while you're alive. We were dancing and dating and singing together. And many people were beginning to establish themselves and have children. My sister-in-law herself gave birth to a child in a DP camp. My nephew Max was born in a hospital in a DP camp. His future wife, Erica Leifer, she was born in a DP camp. My brother-in-law Sam and Rose, they were single when they survived, but they married in a DP camp. And she had her first child there, Eli, my nephew. So these were people beginning to establish, if you may call it so, more normal lives. They wanted to go to the places where there was a secure life. They wanted to come to America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. They wanted to go far away from Europe to get a job, to establish a business, to raise their children. But the people that I knew, my friends, their main aim was, let's go to Palestine. Let's build a place where we will be welcomed and where we will belong. There was only one big problem. The British had a blockade around Palestine. The Zionist people were in touch already with people, you know from where? From Palestine. They organized, the journey itself in Hebrew is called Aliyah. Aliyah Aleph would have been the legal way of getting to Palestine. Aliyah Bet, the second letter of the alphabet, the illegal way. One day, Gustav Lachmann, he was the head of the entire camp. He asked me to go before the British American Commission. I sit in front of people, it's like this, a conversation. They asked me, do you like living here? Of course I don't. Would you like to get out of here? Of course I want to get out of here. Where would you like to go? I would like to go to Palestine. Later on, they told him, this girl is special. She came through to us like we didn't expect. We are granting her a permit to go legally to Palestine. But I said, I'm not going to use that legal permission to go. He says, why? I said, because Lunia is sick. Is it possible that she can go in my place? Because she wouldn't make the illegal passage. She is too weak. I said, let her go now, if she can. And sure enough, she agrees and I agree. And she leaves for Palestine. Not as Lunia, she leaves for Palestine as Lucia Rosenzweig and stays in Palestine under my name. The group that I was with, we were preparing for an illegal, dangerous trip across the Alps. We were told, they didn't mince any words, if you think you cannot make it, stay here. Nobody wanted to stay, we wanted to go on. A time and a day had to be decided to cross the Alps when the snow was going to be strong enough so that when we walk, the snowfall will cover our footsteps. Everybody, every girl in that group was assigned a strong boy next to her. And there were two elderly women. They were assigned two boys. It was a heavy snow. And when you stuck your foot into the snow, it was impossible to pull your foot out. That's how far and how deep it went in. And sometimes at that point we needed somebody to help us. The Alps are still tall mountains. The leaders ahead of us and those who stood behind us, those who said, gather up your strength, your courage, no complaints, we go. We crossed that one, went, high, 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 down, 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 went. And there was another mountain in front of us. This is impossible. This is impossible. We were convinced. By the time we reached the third mountain, or the fourth, we were no longer worried. We knew there's going to be another one. We knew we have to walk, and we'll go a whole night, the entire night, from early evening until very, very, very early at dawn the next day, when we finally crossed the border and found ourselves in Italy. So, what happens is this. The Zionist people, when they knew a transport was going to arrive, they came to see who among the relatives or familiar people were coming with the transport. And guess what? Motel Sas, the one who led me to the work camp, he comes and he meets my transport, and he sees me from his hometown. Somehow he knew that we were coming, going by word of mouth or an underground post office or something. I don't know how he found out. And he says, I want you to know I contacted a community through a Jewish paper in New York. What was the Jewish paper? The Forward. And he puts an advertisement in the Forward. Such and such a child from Scarlet, whose parents are Necha and David Rubin Goldberg, is looking for relatives in America. The ad appears in the paper. A cousin of my aunt's reads the Forward and he sees the newspaper advertisement. Do you believe that, what I'm telling you? He goes over to my Aunt Sadie and he says, I think that you have a child from your family who's looking for you. What? That must be my sister. No, it's not a sister, it's a child. So what happens is my aunt comes to Uncle Jack, Rita's father. She goes to him, she says, you have to help me. He says, what's the matter? And she shows him the Jewish paper. This is my sister, I thought, but it's not. It's my sister's child. He says, what? Where is she? She's someplace in Italy. So let's bring her here. He says, that's what I'm coming for. Let's bring her here. He says, I'm going to call my lawyer and I'm making out papers immediately. And they send me papers to Cremona and Motel Sas address. I said, I'm not going to America. I'm going to Palestine. I want to go on the dinghy to Palestine. In December 1946, we were in Milan, Italy.
This is literally Milan, Italy. So you're now in one of the most cosmopolitan cities
We were not
in the
only-
world, in Milan.
We were.
And you had just
David, it was mind-boggling that there was a place on the planet where there was so much plentiful food. Baskets full. The stalls were full of different fruit, all kinds of colors, pink and red and orange, and there were delicious bread. The bread was so delicious. They said, wait a minute, we are going to buy some butter. You're going to get a roll with butter. Butter? Butter? They have butter in here. Yes. And they gave us butter, and we put some butter on a roll, and with it we had a piece of fresh fruit. Unheard of. Unbelievable. Incredible. But there was a more important reason why we were there. It was right on the edge of the Mediterranean Sea. You can put the story together, why we were brought there, right? It was not very far from Italy to go to Palestine. We went to the Italian Riviera. Outside of Genoa, the little town where we were called Bugliasco. We were staying in that place for a long time. We were treated there as residents. And on December 25th, 1946, I was already celebrating my 16th birthday in Italy.
Porte cazzone con un stemma a rete, una cupolella che vi si era alzata, passa scampanianna pattuleta, con mano a papà te fa guardare. Tu fa l'americano, americano, americano.
The groups which were leaving before us were boarding those ships from these little dinghies, and they took off very, very early in the morning, heading for Palestine. Our leaders, they had to prepare ships, they had to prepare money, they had to prepare dinghies, they had to prepare a certain amount of people to be already there. You weren't putting 20 people on a ship. You had to be, this was a transport which was prepared. Yes. Food enough for the people on the ship, to be able to bribe and to pay the captains to take us there. This was a military preparation, if you wish. Muttlsas, he comes and he is telling me almost every day, you don't want to go to America, that you don't have to go. You're coming to live with us. Towards the end of that year, I finally agree. Okay, I'm going to come to you and I'm going to go to America, but you have to promise me that you're going to send me back to Palestine from America. Yes, he promised me. And then he writes a letter to my family. My uncle said, for God's sakes, let her come here already. She wants to go to Palestine. We will see to it. We'll get her a ticket to send her to Palestine. My uncle decides to send an emissary, a man from our town who lives in New York, related to the Sasses, and he goes to the American consulate. And he presents my case. He says, she's an orphan. Do you guarantee for her? He says, yes, I do. I was given a visa. No more than 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks. And in Naples, I boarded the ship. It was a military boat. These were ships which were decommissioned from the war. It was a dilapidated old boat, but anyway, it was leaving. And I get on the boat. Traveling alone into a kind of voyage that you have no idea how it will open up.
A voyage into the unknown.
Exactly. It was a ship full of people. Those that I recognized who spoke Yiddish were Jewish. They may have been refugees from other countries. On the ship, eye to eye, there were a few hundred people. It was, you know, everybody was assigned a different time where to eat, where to sleep, and so forth. On the ship, you know, you go out in the daytime, you don't sit in one chair, you walk around the deck. We were already at sea. We were out deep. I got sick. I mean, seasick. After about 7, 8 days, I saw the Statue of Liberty a whole night because there was a rain and a storm and the ship could not go in and we had to stay there. And we all spent, those refugees, all of us spent a whole night just looking at the skyline of New York and of the Statue of Liberty. There was a kaleidoscope of feelings in me. Number one was my terrible, my thoughts of my mother came to my mind right away. My mother who waited and wanted so desperately to be reunited with her sister, who wanted so desperately to be able to make it to America. And here I was, and the only thoughts which were going through, one of the few thoughts, not the only one, through my mind was, why was it that my mother was not privileged and destined to be able to stand here and to enter it? Okay, and the other thing was a mixture of, so this is America? So where are the tall buildings? Here, take a look far, that's where the tall, oh, but they're supposed to be skyscrapers. I don't think they're reaching the sky. You know, you have fantasies children have. So this is America was my second thought. And my third one was, I don't know a word of English. What will happen How will I speak to my aunt? How will I explain to her who I am? Will she believe me?
And you arrived in New York and
Yeah.
went through Ellis Island?
No. There was no Ellis Island for us. My aunt and uncle were waiting for me. Who were they? Lenore and Jack and Jules and Rita.
And so the boat docked October 28th, 1947, and you didn't know what Jack and Lenore and Jules
Or Sadie. And they didn't know me.
You had a bag of some? Did you have any kind of?
I had a small valise.
That's it.
That's it.
Small valise.
Yeah, it was half empty. There was nothing in it. I
No,
had nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing. I had a change of shirts, undershirt and panties, and maybe I had another blouse. I don't remember. I had nothing.
How'd they find you? Did they know what you looked like? They had pictures of you? Or?
It was very, very difficult, but there were not that many girls go along, and I alone coming down, and they were straining their neck as much for me as I was straining my neck for looking for somebody, I don't know who.
At what point did you recognize that somebody was looking at you?
I didn't. They approached me. We're looking for a young girl who should be your age, who comes, Ruben, comes from Scarlet. I said, that's me.
No way.
Yeah.
They saw you?
Yes.
And they asked you, this is what we're looking
How
for.
else, David? They didn't know me.
And-
They didn't know me, and I didn't know
So there
them.
were 5 of them there.
Jack, Lenore, and Rita and Jules, and my aunt,
your
yes.
aunt.
2
And-
children and 3
Did
adults.
someone give you a hug?
Yes, my aunt. And started
Aunt
to cry.
Sadie.
Yeah. And then Lenore walked over and hugged me.
What language were you able to say?
With Sadie Yiddish.
Sadie spoke
And she
Yiddish.
was translating. Although Jack claimed that he knows Yiddish, but he only knew what is she saying? Tell her this, and so on. And I settled immediately with Jack's older sister. To me, she was Aunt Annie. Who was she? She was Irving Levy's mother. That was the best thing that ever happened. She was incredible. If there was anybody who was pivotal, and if there is such a thing as a healing, I don't believe all survivors said, what healing? I'm going to heal. Betty would say to me that they drag my 2 children, my little boy, little girl, and they put a bullet into them. If they put a bullet, what healing is that possible? You think about it and you're angry and you're heartbroken and there is a sense of how
But
do I
as you
take
look back
revenge?
on Annie, there was a love that came from her.
Tremendous.
Oh, and that was something that gave you, I
told you,
comfort and a
if you,
sense of
more
place.
than that, David, if there is such a thing as a healing, after a terrible ravage, a terrible catastrophe, a dying is a mourning.
If there's such a thing as a healing,
If there is, it was able to happen for me in that home, Annie's home. And with your father, my husband, Bernie, and our family.
Mom, you're incredible. We all love you so much. I love you.
I love you too, sweetheart.
Mwah.
Schlaf sie mir schon Jankale, mein Scheiner. Die Jägerlach, die Schwarzen macht zu. A Jingele, was hat schon alle Zeindala. Muss noch die Mame singen, ai Lulu. A Jingele, was hat schon alle Zeindala. Muss noch die Mame singen, ai Lulu. A Jingele, was hat schon alle Zeindala. Und wird mit Masel bald in Cheder gehen. Und lernen wird Chumash und Gemorre. Soll weinen, wenn die Mame wiegt ihm ein. Und lernen wird Chumash und Gemorre. Soll weinen, wenn die Mame wiegt ihm ein. A Jingele, was lernen wird Gemorre. Und steht der Tate gefällt und hört sich zu. a Ingele, was wächst all mit Hochem, was ganze Nacht der Mame nicht zur Ruhe. A Ingele, was wächst all mit Hochem, was ganze Nacht der Mame nicht zur Ruhe. A Ingele, was wächst all mit Hochem, und nageniter solcher euch zugleich. A Ingele, a kluger Chosn Bocher, soll liegen so in as wie in a Teich. A Ingele, a kluger Chosn Bocher, soll liegen so in as wie in a Teich. Nu schlaf sie mir, mein kluger Chossenbocher, derweil ich so in Wiegele bei mir. Es wird kosten noch viel mehr und Mames Tränen, bis wann es wird ein Mensch alles von dir. Es wird kosten noch viel mehr und Mames Tränen, bis wann es wird ein Mensch alles von dir.